based on the evidence that we do indeed have a 2,000-year-old burial shroud.
In the silent depths of a centuries-old cathedral, where the echoes of ancient chants still linger in the air, lies a relic wrapped in both mystery and reverence. The Shroud of Turin. For over 600 years, it has remained folded in secrecy, carefully guarded by hands, both trembling in faith and skeptical in inquiry. This linen cloth, bearing the faint, almost ghostly image of a crucified man, is one of the most debated and studied artifacts in the history of religion and science. Its story weaves through time, like the very threads that compose it, fragile, aged, and steeped in wonder. Long dismissed as a medieval forgery, the shroud was written off by many as a clever deception, born in the dark corridors of European history. A product, they said, of religious imagination or artistic trickery. But in 2025, the whispers of doubt have begun to be drowned out by a chorus of new voices: scientists, theologians, skeptics, and believers, all drawn once more into the fold of this sacred mystery. Because what was once thought to be legend is.
This book is your beginner's guide to understanding Scripture. Find peace, build relationships, and discover purpose in today's world. Ready to decode the Bible? Find Bible Decoded available on Amazon now.
Now being reconsidered in the light of emerging evidence, modern tools, and a renewed desire to seek the truth. Not just through faith, but through fact. Let us journey into the past and the present. Let us unfold not just the linen, but the layers of research, debate, and discovery that surround it. This is not merely a tale of a cloth. It is the search for the moment that changed everything. The resurrection of Jesus Christ. And if this ancient shroud did indeed once wrap his body, then we may be looking not only at the face of suffering, but the face of God. This is the story of the Shroud of Turin. This is the search for a sign beneath the vaulted ceilings of the Cathedral of St. John the Baptist in Turin. The shroud rests in a specially designed case, hermetically sealed, temperature controlled, shielded from time as much as possible. But no case, no matter how fortified, can contain the questions that continue to rise like incense in the minds of millions. Who is the man in the image? How was it made? And more haunting still, could this be the actual burial cloth of Jesus of Nazareth? These questions, once considered theological musings, have found new life within the heart of science, where faith meets the microscope and reverence walks hand in hand with reason. In the years following the controversial carbon dating of 1988, doubt reigns supreme in the public discourse. That one result, a date between 1260 and 1390 AD, seemed to decisively conclude the shroud was a medieval fabrication. Museums distanced themselves, academics lost interest, and even some of the faithful struggled to reconcile their devotion with what seemed like a fatal blow. But underneath the headlines and dismissive soundbites, some researchers remained unsatisfied. Quietly, methodically, they began to question the very foundation of the carbon dating study. What if the sample used in 1988 didn't represent the whole cloth? What if it was taken from a section that had been repaired during the Middle Ages? This theory, long ridiculed, gained strength as textile specialists, particularly those familiar with ancient weaving techniques, began comparing the microscopic composition of the tested sample with other areas of the cloth. What they found was troubling. The threads used in the test showed a different weave pattern, a different coloration, and even different fiber degradation than the main body of the shroud. This suggested not only a repair but a patch, an intrusion from another century, stitched into the ancient linen. What had been hailed as conclusive science now looked more like a misstep, one that diverted decades of inquiry. With the dawn of 2025 came new tools and new minds. Scientists like Liberato Daro at the Institute of Crystallography in Bari, Italy, brought a fresh approach. Using X-ray diffraction, a technique that allows researchers to study the structural integrity of material on a molecular level. Darrow and his team were able to analyze how the flax fibers in the linen had degraded over time. Their results were stunning. The degradation patterns matched those of linen known to be 2,000 years old, not 700. These weren't estimates. They were peer-reviewed, reproducible findings. The shroud, they argued, was ancient. If this content blesses you and you'd like to support our mission, you can buy me a coffee or give a super thanks. Every contribution helps us create more content to inspire and uplift others. This revelation rippled across both the scientific and theological communities. It wasn't just the dating that stood in question. It was the entire narrative surrounding the cloth. For centuries, the shroud had been hidden, revealed only occasionally to pilgrims or researchers. Since 2015, it had remained entirely out of public view. But behind those closed doors, analysis never ceased. And in this digital age, secrecy doesn't hold like it once did. Word spread of Darrow's findings, drawing attention from international news outlets, religious scholars, and secular analysts alike. A question that had fallen dormant returned with urgent intensity: was the shroud genuine? As focus shifted from age to origin, other details began to surface, details woven not just into the story, but into the linen itself. One of the most compelling aspects of the shroud is its unique herringbone twill pattern. This style of weaving, rare in medieval Europe, is remarkably consistent with burial linens found in 1st century Middle Eastern tombs. Historians traced the pattern not to Gothic looms of the 13th century, but to the textiles of ancient Syria and Judea, regions intimately tied to the life and death of Jesus Christ. Adding another layer of intrigue was the discovery of pollen trapped within the fibers of the shroud. Using electron microscopes and sophisticated botanical sampling, researchers identified grains from plants indigenous to Jerusalem and its surrounding regions. These species included Gundelia tournifortii and Zygophyllum dumosum, plants used for medicinal and burial purposes in antiquity, and found nowhere near France or Italy.
Feeling anxious or disconnected? Ready for a deeper faith journey designed just for you? Discover Bible Study for Black Women. This guide nurtures faith, strength, and growth week by week. Overcome fear and connect with God. This empowering journey is waiting. Find Bible Study for Black Women on Amazon today and start building unshakable faith.
The conclusion was as direct as it was provocative. The cloth had spent time in the very land where Jesus walked, bled, and, if one believes, rose again. But the most unsettling mystery is the image itself. There it is, etched faintly, yet unmistakably, into the linen, the front and back impression of a man. His hands folded across the waist. His face swollen and bruised. Wounds cover his body. Blood has dried along the scalp, wrists, and feet. His side shows a gash, just as described in the Gospel of John, where a Roman spear pierced Christ after his death. And yet, the more we look, the more questions arise. How did the image get there? It is not paint. It is not ink. It is not burned or dyed. Under ultraviolet light, it glows faintly, but reveals no pigment, no brushstroke, no trace of artistry. Physicist Paulo Di Lazzaro and his team dedicated over 10 years to this question. Their experiments with ultraviolet lasers led to a single, shocking conclusion: the image could only have been formed by a burst of radiant energy. A flash so short and so intense it would require the power of 34 billion watts. To put that into perspective, that's the energy of a nuclear blast focused into less than a billionth of a second. And yet, the cloth was not incinerated. It was not even damaged. The image lies only on the outermost fibers, no deeper than a few microns. No natural event, no known man-made process can duplicate this effect without destroying the linen. And this is where the science begins to tremble. Because if no earthly process can account for the image, and no human artist can recreate it, then what are we left with? A mystery that sits at the intersection of the known and the divine. The Gospels describe Jesus' transfiguration and resurrection with one word repeated often: light. His face shone like the sun, writes Matthew. His garments became white as light. Could the shroud be the photographic record of that unexplainable brilliance? Not the shadow of death, but the flash of resurrection? As new technologies emerged in 2025, the Shroud of Turin became the subject of even more advanced investigations. Artificial intelligence, once reserved for commercial algorithms and digital assistants, was now tasked with the daunting challenge of understanding the unexplained. Using enhanced imaging software and AI-powered pattern recognition, a team from the University of Zurich fed high-resolution scans of the shroud into an algorithm trained on historical textile data and human anatomical structure. What the program returned was far beyond their expectations, not just a flattened silhouette, but a volumetric interpretation of a human form, precise in its dimensions, eerily lifelike in its proportions. In the quiet hum of data labs and imaging chambers, digital maps began to form, not artistic representations, but simulations constructed pixel by pixel from the fabric itself. The image revealed not just a silhouette, but measurable depth, like a 3D topographical model of a man who suffered unspeakable violence. The AI simulations reaffirmed what NASA engineers had first proposed in the 1970s, that the shroud's image contains spatial information consistent with a real body, not a drawing, not a projection. It was a dataset, encoded by a force still unknown. But this was not the only thread being followed. In 2025, a forensic study conducted jointly by Italian and Swiss pathologists reopened the analysis of the bloodstains on the cloth. Using updated spectrometry and biochemical tests, they confirmed not only that the red stains were indeed blood, but also that it was human blood. Type AB, the same type found on various other historical relics traditionally associated with Jesus, including the Siderium of Oviedo. This detail, though seemingly small, carved another pathway back toward authenticity. The blood also told a deeper story. The chemical makeup indicated high levels of bilirubin, a substance produced by the liver during times of extreme trauma. This matched what would be expected in someone who had endured intense suffering, likely scourging and crucifixion. The wounds depicted on the shroud, over 100 distinct lash marks, puncture wounds consistent with a crown of thorns. And the telltale signs of crucifixion were not symbolic. They were clinically accurate. Medical professionals who analyzed the image remarked that no artist of the medieval era could have reproduced such anatomical precision, particularly in places where common knowledge at the time was completely wrong. The wrists bore punctures, not the palms, a detail that contradicted centuries of medieval art but aligned perfectly with Roman crucifixion practices, which required nails to be driven through the wrists to bear the body's weight. The feet showed a single, massive piercing likely made by a long nail driven through both heels. The side wound, large and jagged, was consistent with a spear thrust postmortem, one that would have released fluid as described in John's Gospel. No medieval artist could have anticipated the forensic evidence that would be required to match these details centuries later, and yet the shroud bears them all. In an age when misinformation and fabrication dominate so much of our digital lives, the Shroud of Turin stands in stark contrast, a relic that cannot be replicated, faked, or debunked with ease. As skeptics once said, extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. But what happens when the evidence itself becomes more extraordinary with every examination? What if we're staring at the one artifact in all of history that doesn't bend under the scrutiny of science but holds its shape and its secrets despite it? And still, the mystery deepens. In 2025, a group of molecular archaeologists began analyzing microparticles embedded in the fabric's creases. Specks so small that for decades they went unnoticed. What they found were mineral residues consistent with limestone formations near Jerusalem, specifically the kind found in ancient burial tombs of the 1st century. Alongside these were traces of dried myrrh and aloes, substances traditionally used in Jewish burial rites. These discoveries, taken individually, might be coincidental. But together, they form a chorus of evidence that sings of ancient Judea. Perhaps most incredible was what they did not find: the chemical markers of artificial pigmentation. In every known form of art, whether painting, sketching, or dyeing, there exists residual evidence of human intervention. But the shroud's image displays none of these markers. There is no indication of brushstrokes, pressure application, or dye seepage. The image sits only on the very outer layer of the linen fibers, like a shadow burned by light, and not even light as we know it. The material was not scorched. It was changed at the molecular level, in a way that remains unexplained. From every corner of the academic and spiritual world, voices began to shift tone. Former skeptics became cautious commentators. Prominent podcasters, media personalities, and even celebrity figures began to share stories, images, and thoughts about the shroud. In early 2025, a viral clip of Joe Rogan and Eddie Bravo sparked intense online debate. In it, Bravo, once a staunch denier, sat stunned. "If this thing is real," he whispered, "we're looking at the greatest historical evidence of Christ on earth." That moment caught fire. People began talking, debating, believing. The Netflix documentary Encoded in Light, released that spring, was unlike anything seen before. Combining high-budget cinematography with deep scientific narration, it chronicled the journey of the shroud from its silent slumber in Italy to the fiery debates it sparked in labs and living rooms across the world. Millions streamed it in the first 48 hours. Churches reported packed pews. Scientists found themselves answering questions from pastors, youth groups, and curious agnostics alike. The documentary did not offer conclusions. It offered a mirror, one that reflected our deepest questions about truth, mortality, and resurrection. What emerged was not just renewed curiosity, but personal transformation. Stories poured in from viewers who, after watching the documentary, returned to church for the first time in years. Young people, often disillusioned with traditional religion, found themselves drawn not to dogma, but to the mystery of the image, the mystery of the man. And for many, the question was no longer, is it real? But what does it mean if it is? That shift, from proof-seeking to meaning-making, was perhaps the biggest miracle of all. If this content blesses you and you'd like to support our mission, you can buy me a coffee or give a super thanks. Every contribution helps us create more content to inspire and uplift others. Make sure to subscribe so you don't miss out on my future videos.